discusses some techniques of using fixed cost assets and fixed cost liabilities to maximize return on equity. Okay? So here we're concerned about the degrees of operating leverage, degree of financial leverage. Okay? And you will find out that these operating leverage and financial leverage come from fixed assets and fixed cost. Okay? Fixed financial cost and fixed cost in production. Yeah? So by using these fixed assets and fixed cost wisely, yeah, the companies can increase their return on equity. Yeah? And well, as you already know, it also increases risk. Yeah? So this is just a refinement of what we have discussed already, yeah, in the previous chapters. Yeah. All right. So more specifically, operating leverage involves the use of assets having fixed costs, yeah? And financial leverage is about the use of debts and preferred stocks. Okay? Those I guess components of capital structure, debt and preferred stocks, involve fixed cost, okay? Interest cost and dividend. Okay? All right, so let's try to remind ourselves with the concept of fixed cost. What do we mean by fixed cost? Okay? In economics, I'm sure you've learned about the fixed cost and variable cost. Okay? Variable cost means that this is directly related to the units of output. The more you produce, the higher the variable cost. Okay? But fixed cost is not related to the units of output. Okay? So regardless of how many units you produce, fixed cost remains the same. Okay? So fixed cost looks like this. So regardless of the units, even if you produce 0 unit of output, there is still a certain amount of cost. Okay? That's the concept of fixed cost. Okay? Variable cost, on the other hand, typically goes like this. Okay? It is positively related to the units of output, but in reality it's not really a straight linear fashion, but it has this kind of curvilinear shape. Okay? So the total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. Okay? It looks like that, right? So the gap between the total cost and fixed cost, total cost and variable cost, is exactly the amount of fixed cost. Okay? All right? I'm sure you remember that. Yeah? So what are the examples of fixed costs and variable costs? Okay? Can you come up with some examples of fixed costs? Something that's not related to output? Go ahead. Rent? Okay, yes. If you are running a business in a rented space, yeah, then you pay for the rental payment or lease payment, yeah, regardless of output, whether you produce or not, or whether you produce large quantity or small quantity, doesn't really matter. Yeah? So typically, rental payments, lease payment, these are fixed costs. Okay? Anything else? Insurance, yes, insurance. Business insurance typically is related to time, right? So per 6 months or per year or per month, yeah, you pay the insurance, right? So same thing for the rental, lease, insurance. These are all time related. Okay? Anything else? Yeah. Electricity? Yeah, electricity could be. Electricity could be fixed or variable, right? Actually, there are two components, right? So something like lighting, right? Electricity you use for lighting is usually fixed, okay? But the amount of electricity you use to run the machinery, right, or equipment, right, can be related to output, right? The more you produce, the longer you run the equipment, right? So that part could be variable, right? A similar concept goes to labor. What about labor? Is that variable or fixed cost? Depends on what? Okay, what can be fixed and what part of labor is fixed and what part of labor is variable?
Wage is fixed and bonus is variable.
Bonus? Okay, all right. Yeah, it could be, but typically the manager's salary are fixed, right? So when you have managers, whether you produce or not, you have to pay them because they are on annual contract, right? But the amount of pay to laborers, right? So managers' salary are fixed, but the laborers, right? What you pay to laborers, pay. Maybe you could pay them hourly payments, right? Hourly employees. Okay? Then that will depend on, how long you operate, okay? Which will be positively related to the output. Okay? So that will be variable cost, fixed cost. All right, what about variable costs? Other than the laborers' pay, what else could be variable costs? Yeah? Material, yeah. Materials, right? And we already talked about part of electricity or utility could be variable, right? Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Capital costs related to interest or related to capital, so interest payments and dividend payments usually are fixed. It's not related to the output level. Okay? Income taxes can be related to output level because income taxes depend on how much profit you generate, right? So as your sales increase, your profit can increase, right? And your income tax will increase, right? So that in that sense, that can be variable. Okay? All right, in order to understand the concepts of DOL and DFL, degrees of operating leverage and degree of financial leverage, we need to refresh our memory of income statement. Okay? And here's our traditional income statement, conventional income statement. It starts from sales. And from the sales, we subtract the cost of sales and SGA, right? Selling, administrative, and general expenses. Yeah? And then we come up with operating income, EBIT, right? EBIT is the sales minus operating cost. Yeah? So EBIT in this table, we have $1 million EBIT. Yeah? And from EBIT, we subtract interest expense. Then we arrive to EBT, right? Earnings before taxes. Yeah? And from there, we subtract the income tax, let's say 40%. Right? Then we arrive to EAT, earnings after tax. Okay? And from the earnings after tax, if there is any preferred stock dividend, right, you subtract that, and you finally come up with the earnings available to common stockholders. Right? That's the amount of profit you can distribute or share among the shareholders. Right? And assuming there are 100,000 shares outstanding in the market, right, the EPS comes out to be $3, right, $3 per share, right? You all understand this income statement. Yeah? For the purpose of leverage analysis, like DOL and DFL, right, we need to separate fixed cost from variable cost, okay? Because again, these leverages depend on fixed cost. Okay? So here's a revised income statement. It's basically the same information, but there is slight difference. The difference is we have separated variable cost and fixed cost. Okay? And according to this table, we out of the total cost of sales and the SGA, total operating cost, okay? 3 million is variable cost and 1 million is fixed cost. Let's just assume that, right? Hypothetically. Okay? So the total operating cost is 4 million, so we arrive to the 1 million EBIT, just like before. Okay? And then let's say interest cost is 250,000. Again, interest cost is fixed cost, okay? Because it's the amount of money you pay on your debt, interest payment on the debt, right? And the amount of debt has nothing to do with the output, quantity of output, right? It is not related to the quantity of output, so it is a fixed cost. Okay? So EBT comes out to be 750,000, and then you multiply 40% to calculate the the tax, income tax, okay, which is variable cost. Okay? And so let's say EAT comes out to be 450,000, and from that you subtract preferred dividend, which is fixed. Okay? Preferred dividend is fixed because you pay that amount no matter what, right? When you issue the preferred stock, you promised this dividend payment, right, to the stockholders, right, preferred stockholders. So even if you make negative profit, even if you don't produce anything, right, you're supposed to make the dividend payments to the preferred stockholders. Okay? All right, so again, we arrive to $300,000 net profit, right? Something that can be shared among the owners, right? So the earnings per share comes out to be $3 per share. Okay? So based on this, we can calculate DOL, degree of operating leverage. Okay? Concept of degree of operating leverage is basically this is an elasticity. You remember the elasticity concept, right? In simple principles of economics, I'm sure you have learned elasticity concept. let's say price elasticity of demand, right? That was a percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price, right? So it deals with, well, if we increase the price by 1%, what's going to happen to the quantity demanded, right? Well, we know it's going to go down, right? If you raise the price, quantity demanded will go down, right? But exactly how much, right? That's what the elasticity is about. Okay? So here, DOL at X. What do you mean by X? X is the amount of sale, a particular amount of sale. Okay? We have to define DOL that way because elasticity, if you remember, let's say okay, suppose we have straight linear demand curve. Okay? Then depending on where you are on the demand curve, elasticities are different, right? Do you remember? Okay? If you are at exactly the midpoint, what would be the price elasticity of demand? It would be exactly 1, right? Because of elasticity is this, and calculation form, so this is change in Q over Q divided by change in P over P, which is change in Q P over Q, right? And this is 1 over the slope, right? Slope of the demand curve, because the slope is change in P over change in Q, right? So this is exactly 1 over the slope. Okay? And then if you pick the midpoint, right, and that's 1/2 P, 1/2 Q, right? So if you plug in, right, 1/2 P, 1/2 Q, and so on, right, you come up with exactly 1. Everything cancels out, right? All right. What about here? If you are on the location which is above the midpoint, elasticity will be? It will be greater than 1, right? Somewhere here, elasticity is less than 1. What if here, at the corner? You remember? Infinity, right? Elasticity would be infinity, and here, elasticity is 0, right? Again, by substituting P, because this is 1 over slope, right? At this point, whatever P we have, Q is 0, right? If Q is 0, then the whole thing becomes infinity, or actually undefined, whatever, right? If you divide something by 0, right? Yeah, so the point is, depending on where you are, right, elasticity differs, right? So you have to define a DOL at a certain level of sales. Depending on the actual level of sales, this whole thing, DOL, changes, right? DOL depends on the level of sale. Okay? All right, so it is the concept is if the sales increase by 1%, what happens to EBIT, operating income, right? That's the idea of DOL, right? Exactly the same concept as elasticity. Okay? All right, so you can calculate it that using, if you are provided with this kind of table, right? Let's say initially we have $5 million sales, right? And sales go up to 5.5 million, which is 10% increase in sales, right? And as a result, what happens to EBIT, right? Well, assuming with the 60% variable cost, in other words, out of the total cost, right, the proportion of variable cost is 60%, right? Then we find out that the variable cost will increase this much. Of course, fixed cost doesn't change because fixed cost is fixed, right? So the total cost increases by 8%, right? And as a result, the EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, will increase by 20%, right? So you can calculate it, change in EBIT is 20%, change in sales was 10%, right? So DOL comes out to be 2, right? According to this table, right? There's another way to calculate it. You can use this formula, right? Sales minus variable cost divided by EBIT, right? If you use this formula, then you don't need to know actual table. I mean, like this, right? You don't need 2 columns. Based on only 1 column, you should be able to calculate DOL, right? If you use this formula. Okay? That's the benefit of using that formula, right? Well, how does it work? How do you know this formula is the same thing as this thing, right? So I'll give you about 2 minutes to think about it and actually prove it, and I'll give you a hint. Okay? Sales is, of course, P times Q. When we say sales, we're talking about sales revenue, total revenue, right? EBIT is sales minus variable cost minus fixed cost. In other words, sales minus total cost, right? That's EBIT, right? So it is PQ minus V times Q minus FC, let's say, fixed cost. Okay? So here V is per unit variable cost, per unit variable cost. Okay? If you use that, then you can prove that this formula, this one, is exactly the same thing as this one. Right? I'll give you 2 minutes. Why don't you try? That is actually one of the practice questions at the end of the chapter, so you have to do it anyway. Use this 4 expression and just substitute it here, and everything cancels out. You'll be left with this. Okay? So eventually you come up with P times Q minus B times Q divided by EBIT. That's funny. EBIT, right? And that's the sales, that's the variable cost, and yeah, you come up with that expression, right? So yeah, once you use this, you can easily prove, right, this formula. Okay? Just the side exercise. Yeah? All right, so higher fixed operating costs lead to higher DOL. Right? Well, if you think about it, holding the sales constant, if the proportion of total, the proportion of fixed cost is higher among the total cost, right? And that means variable cost will be smaller, right? So if you subtract the smaller variable cost, then you will have a higher DOL, right? You understand the relationship, right? So holding the sales constant, if the fixed cost increases, right, then the variable cost decreases, right, and that will increase DOL, right? Degree of operating leverage, okay? So the story is if you use large amount of fixed cost, fixed input, right, then for a certain amount of for given amount of increase in sales, right, your operating profit, operating income will rise faster. Okay? That's what we call degree of operating leverage. Okay? All right, so here, here's an example of actual percentages, right? And I just showed you in this case, degree of operating leverage comes out to be 2, right? Because for 10% increase in sales, okay, we see 20% increase in EBIT, right? Operating income. Okay. Here they tried a few different levels of sales, okay, starting from $500,000 to $6 million, and calculated DOL based on the formula, okay? And you come up with these different levels of the degree of leverage, okay? And here, at $2.5 million sales, the DOL is undefined. Okay? What do we mean by that, undefined, and what does it happen? Okay? With a given level of fixed cost, DOL is the highest when the firm is breaking even. When the firm is breaking even. Right? By breaking even, we mean EBIT is 0. When EBIT is 0, right, DOL is the highest. Right? And you can understand it by looking at the formula here. If EBIT is 0, right, then we have 0 at the bottom, at denominator, right? And that makes the DOL largest, or infinity, right? Or undefined. You can understand it either way, right? Right? Mathematically, it is undefined because you have 0 in the numerator and denominator, right? But in reality, right, what that means is the DOL is the largest, right? So we have, in this situation, you can see here, right? As the sales level approach the break-even level, this is break-even level. If the sales is 2.5 million according to this table, right, then your EBIT would be 0, right? EBIT. if you substitute the 250, I'm sorry, is it 2.5 million? Yeah, if the 2.5 million, if you substitute 2.5 million into this table and calculate all the variable costs and the fixed costs, you'll find out that EBIT comes out to be 0, right? And at that time, the DOL will be undefined, right? Because it's it's something divided by 0, right? Well, and then, so either way, on the positive side, on negative side, as we approach the break-even point, right, DOL increases in terms of absolute value, right? If the DOL is negative, what does that mean? Can you think about it? If the DOL is negative, negative 4.0, what does that mean? Remember the concept of DOL is percentage change in EBIT over percentage change in sale. Okay? And this comes out to be, say, negative 4.0. What does that mean? For 1% increase in sales, right? Yeah, percentage change in EBIT is negative by 4%, right? So here you have to understand that, right? In this level, we are making a loss, right? Because this total revenue is below the breaking even point, right? But the size of loss declines by 4%, right? When the sales increases, when sales increases by 1%, right, the loss decreases by 4%. Okay? Make sure you understand that relationship. Yeah? That's what negative elasticity tells us. Okay? It's a little bit confusing because if you just literally interpret this formula, right, this whole thing is negative, right? So you might want to say when the sales increases by 1%, EBIT goes down by 4%, right? But think about it. When the sales increases, EBIT will not go down. Right? Even if it's a negative range, okay, the percentage change, right, will be slowed down, right, when your sales improve, right? So at this point, the story is if you are currently selling at $2 million, if your current sales level is $2 million, right, then your profit, the operating income will be negative, right? And at this point, if sales increases by 1%, right, then your loss will be reduced by 4%, right? That's what negative 4 means. Okay? Make sure you understand the meaning of negative DOL. Okay? Any question about DOL? All right. Oh, yeah.
What do you mean by loss? Because there is a benefit.
Of increased sales. Right. So, if you look at this table, okay, depending on the level of sales. This is the break-even point, right? So any sales level above break-even point, you will make profit, positive profit, right? If your sales is below the break-even point, your profit will be negative, right? And that the negative 4.0 elastic. Remember, this is elasticity, right? And that means for 1% change in sales, there will be 4% change in EBIT, right? And when sales increases, your loss will be actually reduced rather than increase, right? So that means when the sales improve by 1%, your loss will be reduced by 4%. Okay? Okay. DFL, degree of financial leverage, has to do with financial cost, okay? The interest payment and preferred dividend. Okay? And by definition, right, DFL is concerned with the relationship with the EBIT and EPS, right? So it measures the relationship between changes in EBIT and changes in EPS, earnings per share. Okay? So it measures, well, if EBIT increases by 1%, what happens to earnings per share? Okay? So let me give you some idea first. Okay? Here, look at this. Starting from sales, we subtract operating costs and we arrive to operating profit here, EBIT, right? EBIT is operating income. And then after that, we subtract some financial costs and we arrive to EPS. Okay? So DOL is concerned with the process from the beginning to this level where we arrive to EBIT, right? And DFL is concerned with what happens after that, right? What happens after EBIT is calculated, from EBIT to EPS, right? And depending on how much interest cost and the dividend cost you have, right? We have different DFL, right? So we're talking about the leverage, right? Depending on how you use this financial cost, the interest cost and dividend cost, right? It affects the EPS, earnings per share, which is return on your equity, right? Okay, so the concept is when the EBIT changes by 1%, what happens to the EPS, earnings per share, right? And this formula can be written or reduced to this level, this formula, right? And for that, we're not going to do it here, but let me give you a hint. Yeah? You can use EPS is 1 over NE. Okay, EBIT minus I times 1 minus T minus DP. That's it. Okay? Think about it. What are we doing here? EBIT minus EBIT minus I, what is it? EBT, right? This is earnings before interest and taxes. Now you subtract interest, so this is EBT, right? And you multiply by 1 minus T, so the whole thing becomes what? EAT, earnings after tax. From the earnings after tax, you subtract, what is it? Preferred dividend, right? Preferred dividend, right? So the whole thing is what we call the something that can distribute it among or shared among the owners, right? And so what is N minus M? I mean NE? What do you think? What should be? Right. This is number of equity, right? Shares, right? So number of shares outstanding in the market, right? So if you divide the whole thing by number of shares, you arrive to EPS, right? So you substitute that to EPS and change in EPS, right? And then you will come up with this formula, right? A little bit of mathematical workout, right? You will come up with this formula, yeah? Okay. Okay. Again, we have to calculate DFL at a certain level, and this X here is what? In DOL, this was the particular level of sales, right? And DFL, this would be the particular level of what? EBIT, right? So at certain level of EBIT, we can calculate DFL. In other words, DFL will be different depending on the level of EBIT, okay? DFL is maximized at the level of EBIT where EPS is 0. Can you understand that, right? Just look at this formula, right? Regardless of what the level of EBIT and the change in EBIT is, if EPS is 0, right, then the numerator will be what? Change in EPS divided by 0 would be infinity, or actually undefined, okay? Mathematically undefined, but in practice, if EPS is extremely small, right, then this whole thing, numerator, will be infinity, right? So that's how you can understand this statement. DFL is maximized at the level of EBIT where EPS is 0. If EPS approaches 0, right, then degree of financial leverage will be the largest. Right? Okay, so let's think about a few mathematical or hypothetical example, right? So let's say EBIT was 400,000. Okay? And from that we subtract interest expense, 250,000, which is fixed cost. Okay? It doesn't depend on EBIT or level of sales. Yeah? This EBIT depends on level of sales, you know that, right? This operating income, right? Okay? All right? And so EBT comes out to be different levels, right? And from there you subtract income tax. Income tax is variable cost because it depends on EBIT, size of EBIT, right? All right, and then after that you subtract preferred dividend. Again, preferred dividend is fixed cost. Okay? So because of this fixed interest cost and fixed dividend cost, right? We have different levels of earnings available to commercial and different levels of EPS, right? And based on these numbers, if you calculate DFL, I don't think you have this DFL numbers in your printout, right? You can easily calculate it, right? Using either formula, right? But using the second formula will be easier, right? So DFL for the first column, for example, would be 400,000 divided by 150,000 minus 150,000 divided by 0.6, right? Right? According to the second formula, right? EBIT divided by EBIT minus I minus DP divided by 1 minus T, right? And that comes out to be negative 4, right? It works out. And if you use the same formula for all these columns, you come up with this DFL. Yeah? Okay, so what is the interpretation here? Negative 4. Again, we have negative elasticity here. Can someone try? Notice that at this level, EPS is negative here, right? EPS is negative 0.6. Okay? Earnings per share. In other words, this company is making a loss, right? As you see here. Earnings available to common shareholder is negative 60,000, right? And that's because EBIT is too low, right? Operating income is too low. So after paying all the interest and dividend, you lost money, right? So at this level, DFL is negative 4, right? What does that mean?
1% increasing EBIT.
Oh, okay.
4% increasing
4% decline in okay, yeah, EPS loss, right? So 1% increase in EBIT leads to 4% reduction in EPS loss, right? Or you can say negative amount of EPS, right? So this what that means is if EBIT increases, then EPS will increase. The negative size of EPS will be reduced, right? Make sure you understand that. Okay? So we have 0 here, EPS. Okay? When EBIT increases, right? Let's say, right? The EPS, negative EPS will actually improve, right? So negative size magnitude will be reduced, right? That's what this negative DFL means again, right? Right. So here, according to, yeah, actually we have a graph here. Yeah, here. This is the graph, sorry. Yeah. So we have 400,000, 800,000, 1.2 million, and so on, right? And EPS was negative at this level, right? And if you go to 800,000 EBIT, EPS becomes positive, right? So somewhere between 400,000 and 800,000 EBIT level, there is the point where EPS will be 0, right? can we actually calculate that level? Apparently, they found out that level is 500,000, right? In other words, if EBIT comes to $500,000, EPS will be 0, which means DFL will be maximum, right? DFL will be maximized at that level, right? How do you do that? Well, again, you use this formula, right? And set EPS to 0, right? And solve for EBIT. Just plug in all the numbers, right? The number of shares outstanding, interest cost, and the tax rate, and the preferred dividend, right? And solve it for EBIT, where EPS is 0, right? Then you'll come up with 500,000 in this example, okay? All right. So here, let me make one more observation, one more comment, okay, before I let you go. Think about this third column here. Third column. Okay? We have EBIT of 1 million, so interest expense 250, and so on. And finally, we come up with the EPS of $3 per share. Right? And this, if you think about it, if you remember, this is actually, this one, right? This column. We're talking about the same case here, same case, EBIT. When the sales was 5 million, EBIT was 1 million, right? And after subtracting the interest cost and the preferred dividend, we end up with the $3 earnings per share, right? So based on this, you can calculate DFL. DFL is percentage change in EBIT divided by percentage change in earnings per share divided by percentage change in EBIT, right? And percentage change in earnings per share was 40% here. Percentage change in EBIT was 20%. So 40% divided by 20% would be what? 2, right? Right. So as you see here, DFL comes out to be 2. I mean, whether you use this formula, right, or this formula, you come up with the 2 for DFL, right? One thing you have to be, I was a little bit confused in the beginning, right? Here, DFL is 2 based on these numbers, and earlier we came up with the DOL equals 2. Is there any connection? I mean, does DOL always equal to DFL? Not really, right? This is just a pure coincidence in this example, right? So DOL came out to be 2 in this case. DFL comes out to be 2, right? That's just coincidence, right? DOL and DFL has nothing to do in common, I mean, other than it's related to EBIT, right? So DOL depends on the amount of fixed cost. DFL depends on the interest cost and preferred dividend, right? So that's just a coincidence, right? Okay. Any question about DOL and DFL? Okay, we'll try to finish this chapter on Thursday. All right, I'll let you go today.